This next video is continuing in the series of sort of several very useful and practical resources and forums on the internet where you can pull geographic data for analytics. And there's obviously, hundreds, if not thousands, of resources in your time that you'll explore to sort of find and create data. But I did want to create a couple that I think are really useful to have off the bat. And this next one is using a resource called Openstreetmap. And Openstreetmap, can be thought of in some ways as like a Wikipedia for mapping. It's sort of the open source forum for users to create geographic content throughout the world. So anything from sites of interest to land uses to street grids. Similar with Wikipedia, it has a broad network of people providing sort of support and oversight to make sure that the information is accurate when possible. And we are often used to seeing it in its Basemap form, right? I'm sure some of you have even seen an OpenStreetMap Basemap before, like here. In ArcGIS, you can even come in and make it one of your base maps if you wanted, OpenStreetMap. But one of my favorite sort of little geographic learnings over time is that there are resources you can actually use where you can extract and turn into shapes the information that's behind the scenes here. You can grab the roads, you can grab the parking lots, you can grab the buildings, you can grab the land uses, you can grab the points of worship, you can grab the universities. And it's a really useful way, to augment data in cities that you're working. And when you're working in cities that maybe don't have the best coverage or don't have publicly accessible data or haven't invested yet in an open data portal, it's a really good way to potentially get coverage of some geographic areas that would allow you to map. So first thing is, if you were to go to a place called OpenStreetMap, this is what lets you explore. And I want to show you something, where it first appears that you're going to get this data. But I'm going to lay a disclaimer that the export function here is incredibly useful, but it is one of the flaws of ArcGIS that we can't process OpenStreetMap data in its raw form. You actually have to have a toolbox that I don't think the university has the extension license to. I'm checking with the appropriate people to see if we have it. But it is called the data interoperability, and it's a way that lets you take what this data is, which is OSM. How a spreadsheet is a XLS and the PPT, and we use shapefiles, SHP. This is OSM, and convert that OSM into sort of a shapefile. Without that tool, you can't actually process these in ArcGIS. No, that said, I'm going to show you resources that have them pre-processed for you. So this video isn't going to end in a dud. It's going to end with sort of the workarounds and where we can get this data. But I am going to put a pin in this quickly because I want to show you that you can come up here to this export function, and you can select an area you want. I'll just pick sort of like a part of West Philly right here. And you could export if you want, and it'll come down here and tell you that you're exporting an OSM. And for those of you that followed me, just put a pin in this, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an optional video at the end of today that introduces a type of software that we may investigate at the end of the year when we have time, called Qgis. And Qgis is an open source GIS platform, so free to use, free to download. It is certainly not as user-friendly as Pro. Pro, you pay for it, but certainly has kind of built itself to be a very, beginner and novice-friendly mapping software. Q, I think has a little bit rougher of an interface, but once you learn it, it's a great tool, and it has many of the same tips and techniques that we've been learning with ESRI. They're just stored in different places, right? So they take different muscle memory to learn. But you can process OSM data immediately in Q. It comes right in, you can work with it. And the cool thing is you can even export it as a shapefile. So that's the special video for those that find that interesting, and want to download Q. I'll show you quickly how it could work. And that just makes sort of a quicker and more granular way to extract OpenStreetMap data. Because the workaround I'm going to show you, you can pull data in at like the state level. And then from there, you can zoom into areas you want to work with. But you're just sort of pulling larger data sets. And you do that with something called GeoFabrique downloads. So if you were to click on that, it would take you to this server. And it usually starts you kind of on this first page. And what you can start doing here is pulling data from entire continents, which we're not going to do, but let's click on each continent we want to go to or where we want to be, like North America, and zoom in. And then you could start picking sub-regions within that. So maybe I'll come to sort of the U.S. where I want. And then notice it starts to have states. And the other cool thing that happens is you get this column that pops up called SHP zips. And what that means is that it is making shapefile data available to you. Now be cognizant, right? Because this is how big the shapefiles are. You download California, a huge state, you're talking a gig of data. They're not even going to give you that in sort of a shapefile kind of format. You got to work actually through one of these others and have some sort of conversion tools there, which is a bit of a bummer, or you got to go in and get sort of sub-extracts. But for pretty much any other state, like the one we'll be looking at here, like Pennsylvania, for example, you can come into Pennsylvania, right, and you could click this shapefile. And I've already downloaded it, so it'll take like a couple minutes because it's 200 or so megabytes. So if you guys want to download it and then pause this video while you wait, but you click on it and you can download, and you'll get something called like Pennsylvania latest, so on and so forth. And so if we open up, our Arc Pro and see what that looks like, first thing we're going to do is I want to create like a benchmarker in Philly. So you could come up to these little, locate binoculars. It's something we talked about briefly in day one. You can, you always like search places in the world and it'll just zoom you there. It's a quick way to sort of orient yourself in a location. So I've got my like benchmark here in Philly. And if I come here and I refresh and I look for that data that I just downloaded, Pennsylvania latest free, it looks noisy at first, right? It sort of takes all these different layers and throws them together and gives them sort of strange names. But what we're going to start doing here is I'm going to take them in one by one and show you what they have and what's available. And gradually, I think you'll start to see the sort of power and the utility of OpenStreetMap and GeoFabrique downloads and just what you can get access to and how useful it can be. So I encourage you to examine each of these, but let's pull them in a couple at a time and look. So first thing I might pull in is buildings, and immediately it's going to take me to the literal scale of Pennsylvania, right? I've got not necessarily every building. Remember, it's not that every single building's been mapped. It's every one that someone has mapped on OpenStreetMap. Just like not everything in the world has a record on Wikipedia. Most things do. And let's use my bookmark back to get back to that Philly point I took. And I can maybe sort of zoom in on Center City or West Philadelphia or something. Maybe I'll turn it off so it digitizes, or it doesn't digitize till I'm down here. I'll just zoom into sort of like a granular location. And notice what it sort of created for me here is quite literally, for almost every building, a shape. And I can sort of come in and what I'll do is maybe grab a quick selection of some of the buildings. Just pick select rectangle and drag a couple of them. It's going to take a second. It's a bit slow here to process. Maybe way too slow. May need to be another video pause and process here. Let me try to hit escape to cancel. There we go. All right, so I only did that, and then I'll stop visualizing for a second so that it doesn't take up my memory. But if I open the attribute table and sort of look at what I created right there, not going as smooth as I want. Sorry, gang, for the kind of delay here. If this crashes or does something, you may see me pick up, a little later in the video. This is kind of being rough, so I'm gonna stop this one. I'll start the video in a second when it's fixed, and there'll be a little bit of a blurry jump cut here, but give me a second. The graphics card crashed. So you'll notice a little hiccup in the video, but we should be kind of back right at the same point. I pulled in the buildings layer from the Openstreetmap, and I've just turned it off so it doesn't digitize. But I opened the attribute table so you can start to see I've got buildings, and I've got their name, and I've got their type, right? And the information is not always complete, but it's extremely helpful and fascinating, right? And this is all over Pennsylvania, and I could focus in on this area in Philadelphia, and you saw when it was turned on simply how good the coverage was. And I can start bringing in some other resources and visualize, what we have and what's available to us right here. I could take in sort of a land use file. And give it a second to load. And that'll start digitizing as well. It'll take a second to kind of get through everything. And if I started clicking on these, I'd see things like grass and sort of park and university and playground. So it's interesting, right? I'm starting to get these land uses that would be valuable. Even more so when you come down to places like POFW, that's points of worship, right? So I could actually see the polygons for mosques and synagogues and churches and sort of other sites of worship start to pop up, and by clicking on them, I'd know their name. Some of the other really useful ones, POIS, is sort of points of interest. This is where like a lot of different random kind of grab bag of things may find themselves, right? So I could come in again and select and maybe just try to, draw a box in some areas over here and give that a second to process and come in and check that attribute table. And just if I look at kind of what I selected, right, that same thing, I've got a class that sort of identifies what they are, and that's great. I can start to see I've got town halls and parks and courthouses and hotels, right? And when we start learning techniques next week around selecting out data, I can start to parse this down and maybe look at where all the hotels are or the parks or the hospitals or whatnot. And there's two more that are even more fascinating. One that has become a major part of my practice and sort of research for work, and that's the traffic one. If you drag in traffic, one of the cool resources that it gives you, and again, it's important to remember that the coverage will be different in every state, these are parking lots. And I can start to see not necessarily complete, but a good visualization of where there is parking in a city, where there's surface lots, their size, their name, where there's multi-story parking, so on and so forth. And then under the roads one right here, roads and railways, I can see sort of the road network and the railway network. So again, OpenStreetMap through those GeoFabrique downloads is just an excellent resource. And give this a moment while it digitizes these roads, and then I'll figure a workaround to sort of make this computer a little less slow. An excellent resource if I want to pull sort of broad user-generated geographic data for really anywhere in the world. And again, just like a Wikipedia, it's going to depend on where you are, will determine sort of the coverage and how deep that you can get. And I'm not going to play with my graphics card right now, but if you're following and you chose to select these roads or zoom in, you would see that you have things like the speed limit, if there's a tunnel, if there's a bridge, the type of road they are, so on and so forth. So it's just an excellent resource, OpenStreetMap, as a way to pull this sort of awesome open source data at any place in the world. It's really a good first resource that you can look for as you wait and working through and navigate looking for like an open data portal at a city or working with a county or a city government to be able to provide you data files.